Our next speaker is a therapist, Jeremy Lanning. He's a licensed professional counselor, psychotherapist practicing in the Fort Worth area and surrounding areas. He specializes in trauma, critical response, issues of suicidality, and divorce recovery. We'd like to welcome Mr. Lanning. Thank you.
I want to thank you for the invitation to speak here today, and I thank the folks that have come before me, and it's an impressive panel, and in no way is my attempt to reiterate any of the details of the expertise that has come before me. When I was asked to speak, or asked if I'd be interested in presenting, I said of course before I thought about what I might present about. And so what I did was I took a look at what my current practice of mental health counseling and psychotherapy looked like currently. And then it became clear to me what I felt like my job was to do today. And that is put a face towards what it looks like to be a father caught in this system, and what it looks like for a professional in the mental health world to work with non-custodial parents and parents who are alienated or separated from their children for one reason or another. And one of the things I thought of was I thought back about 15 years. I was working in cardiac surgery at the time as an assistant, and I had worked a full 24 hours, and then I worked an additional 6 or 7 hours in surgery without a break or a bathroom break or food or anything. It was just one of those evenings. And I got up the next day and I decided I was going to go to the YMCA and go for a swim. And so when I showed up at the YMCA at the pool area at 1 o'clock on a weekday, needless to say, I was the youngest person there. And I was enjoying my time with folks. I think the next youngest person there besides me was about 80, maybe 82. And at the time that I finished my swim, I noticed they had, at this YMCA, they had a whirlpool area. So I said, I'm going to go sit in there for a minute. And it was almost full to capacity with folks. And they were sitting there enjoying themselves. And as I walked up towards the whirlpool, there was a handrail going down into it. And on the left side of it, a woman was coming up, and I was heading in. So I thought, okay. So I head towards the rail, and I put my hand on the rail, and I take a step into the whirlpool, and I realized very quickly there were no stairs there at all. Nothing. And I was falling. You know, I could feel my center of gravity shift, and I thought, oh, this is terrible. And I was going face first in a giant YMCA whirlpool in the middle of probably 10 people, and I was going to go right to the bottom. And so I hit the water, and I sank to the bottom, and as I'm trying to gather myself and get up, I'm, you know, being scraped by feet and who knows what else. It was awful. And I'll connect the dots here, right? So I hit the ground, and I get up thinking, I'm just going to soak this in and just leave and be done with it. And so I stand up, and everybody's looking at me, and I look over at the handrail, and my first thought is, I never saw that coming. Never in a million years would I thought that I was going to fall flat on my face at the bottom of a hot tub in that fashion. And my second thought that I had was, who in the world would design that? It made no sense to me. So then as I was contemplating if this could get any worse, I looked down at this woman that was sitting there, and she pointed for me to look down. And I looked down, and it was just nothing but blood. I had apparently hit my leg. I know it's disgusting. I hit my leg, and so I'm standing there in the aftermath of this thing, and all I could think of was, I never saw this coming, and who in the world would design something like this? And I only tell that story because that's exactly how I felt within 5 minutes of walking into the family court system, thinking that this was a system that was designed to get me through this and preserve the dignity of my children and their experience with their family members and having equal time. And one of the things I would ask is, I would ask two questions. The first question I would ask is, does a man or even a non-custodial parent really have to worry about losing his or her life when they're trying to be a full and equal parent and present to their children post-divorce? And the second question I would ask is, is there a good child-centric reason to not desire equal time for that child with both parents? And from a reasonable standpoint, the answers would seem simple, but I feel like we get bogged down. And my goal for what I would hope to communicate through a personal and professional anecdote, is that we desperately need to rethink our antiquated and adversarial family court system in a way that puts children who are in the middle first, but also that preserves the ability of both parents post-divorce to have a healthy and functioning life moving forward, so that they can be able to do what they need to do as adults of children and create healthy relationships to ensure the future of their children and their ability to do the same. I don't see a more important legacy building tool than being able to be a parent post-divorce and construct a life with healthy adult relationships, or else how else are the children or even the adults going to know that it was worth it, that the pain and the suffering and the misery, assuming that's present, I mean it's present there for sure on some level, I'm a child of divorce myself. In my opinion, as a mental health professional, that's what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about what these relationships look like for children post-divorce when they enter the adult world. And even the non-custodial parents, whether male or female, yes, it's overwhelmingly men are the non-custodial parents. I'll tell you something interesting that I've noticed, is that the clients that I work with who are female and non-custodial parents, their fight is equally difficult, and in some senses it's a little bit more bizarre. Every single female that I work with that's a mother who's a non-custodial parent is considered to be mentally unstable. Period. If it's a father, they're unfit, they're unwilling, they work too much, they don't have what it takes, they're not nurturing enough. It's all the things that we're familiar with in this fight. But without a doubt, every single non-custodial parent who's a female that I've worked with is considered to be, I know we don't say access to anymore, but is considered to have some sort of disordered type thinking and they're mentally ill. And to watch them try to claw their way out of that system and get their children back it's incredibly painful to watch even as a practitioner. And so when I ask the question, does a man really have to worry about dying while trying to be a good and present father post-divorce? The answer is yes. And my choice to focus on the suicidality of what it looks like for non-custodial parents, and according to the numbers, especially the overwhelming majority of them who are fathers, that's the thought that comes to my mind, because that's a population that I work with. I work with a population of people who are actively suicidal. Part of it is the nature of my clientele. I have first responders, veterans, Tier 1 military, retired military, healthcare workers, and people who are going through divorce. And from my perspective, and maybe it's because of the time that I served in the military, the point of entry for the maximum amount of help for somebody is right at the contact. It's what people in the ATF call the space between the flash and the bang. And the space between the flash and the bang may be 1/1000th of a second, and you're never going to be able to access it. But when it comes to explosives, between the flash and the bang is where all the evidence exists in pristine condition to solve that particular crime. So what we've learned in the military in terms of mental health is that the most immediate interaction that you can have from a mental health perspective to somebody who's experienced trauma, the higher likelihood of success you're going to have for recovery for that person. So yes, I hang around in the family court system. I hand out cards. I look for people to work with who are right at that point of entry to the family court system to try to equip them with the tools that they need to negotiate it, because it's such an unreal sort of environment, if that makes any sense. I feel like from a personal and professional standpoint, the first step is equal and shared parenting, the presumption of that in the family court system. I certainly don't need to reiterate everything that's been said so far because it's been prolific. But it is true. That presumption of that, I can tell you that my ex-wife and I grew up together. We're not the same people because of the process we went through with the family court system. At times it turned us into people that I don't think we ever would have become. And the cause is right, the fight is right, but does it really need to be an adversarial nature? If you presume equal and shared access to children from the very beginning, the folks where you need consideration as to whether or not that's appropriate currently can be taken care of by the system that's in place right now. I mean, we allow for that. It's just that the system starts off with that presumption that, I mean, look, two things that occurred in 1974. One, I was born, and that's good. And number two, if I'm not mistaken, 1974 was the year that the legal presumption of the biological mother being the fit parent was removed. And statistically, things have remained somewhat unchanged. And so, in a lot of ways, that still exists. Now, as a disclaimer, my fight for equality and time with my children had nothing to do at all whatsoever with disparaging the mother of my kids, despite whatever the circumstances were of the divorce. In this particular fight for fathers who are non-custodial parents, we're never going to achieve what we want to achieve by holding anybody else down. And so part of my job is to equip men with the ability to fight for their rights, to see their children, but also to make sure they're prepared to do that. You can't walk into a courtroom and say, I want to see my kids 50% of the time, and have no idea how to answer how you're going to get them to school. You can't do it. You also can't go in and make arguments for yourself when you're making arguments against other people. One thing that I've learned in the world of mental health is that if you give people enough room to expose themselves, they will, good and bad. And so it's important to me that in the aftermath of a divorce, for the people that I work with, it's about creating an environment where people can advocate for themselves, because the truth is the easiest story to tell. And I can't think of a good argument to limit access to fit and able parents when they want equal time with their children. Now, another thing that I'll say is that when you think of, in terms of aftermath, I'm not sure if any of y'all are familiar with that word, but aftermath, I think it was like it was a 1400s agricultural term. And if you think of the word math as the word like mow, whenever there was a crop and that crop was eliminated, whether it was mowed or harvested or grazed or whatever grew out of that soil next, which typically wasn't planted, that was what they considered to be the aftermath. If any of y'all have been on any tours of wineries or anything like that, and you'll notice they sell a lot of mustard and stuff like that at wineries, the aftermath of grape crops, that soil is perfect for mustard seed. And so a lot of times in the winter crops, that's what they'll use their aftermath for, is they'll harvest really incredible seeds for mustard. And you'll see a lot of that stuff for sale. Well, I can remember precisely when my fight within the parental rights system started. And when I found out, I knew for about 8 months that divorce was imminent in my personal situation. I had just known. I chose to not let it be known that I knew, and I prepared myself physically and mentally and spiritually, made sure I was going to counseling, I had gotten an attorney, I was trying to prepare myself and make sure that I was taking care of my children. When it became known that I knew, I was asked to leave. And of course, I refused to leave my home. There was no reason for me to. And I was told that the police were going to be called, and that I would be accused of abuse and all these kinds of things. And I remember getting scared and thinking to myself, I guess I should probably go, because that's going to turn out pretty poorly for me, I'm sure. But then I thought to myself, if I do that though, then what's next? You know, what's my next step? And I knew that if I stayed, that I would find that out. And that story ends with me in the home alone, tucking my kids, my very small 3 children, to sleep that night. I, in fact, was not asked to leave. And that was the first empowering moment that I had in my particular fight, just for equality with my children. Now, full disclosure, I have 3 children. The older children up here are my 3 older children with my ex-wife. That little guy in there is my 11-month-old. I've been remarried for some time now, and that's who he is. And I get a tremendous amount of strength from them. And they've really been amazing throughout this whole process. And I have them now through years and years and years, and I can't tell you how many times in court I fought to be able to have 50% week on, week off time with my children. But it wasn't always the case. In the immediate aftermath of my divorce, I can remember that once the temporary orders were signed and I had standard possession, that's when I left and I moved into an apartment that was completely empty. I had nothing. And I had a steady stream of folks coming from church dropping me pans and groceries and things off. I was working about 60 hours a week. I was in school full-time as part of our parental plan that was now blowing up, but I was going to finish it. And I can remember I went 11 days, and I had my 2 hours to see my kids. I was denied the first time, another 11 days, so I had been I think at about 20 days total. I hadn't seen my kids. I went from full-time hands-on dad all over the place because of various family situations. I had exercised all family medical leave hours for probably 5 years per for about 5 years, all hours per year, staying home and caring for various things while being the sole provider and working and going to school. And I went from that immediately, like a snap of the fingers, to living alone in this apartment. And when I finally was able to get my children for 2 hours, and I went to pick them up, and I could hear from the background a strange voice saying, make sure they're home on time. And of course I had 9 hours of activities planned in 2 hours, you know, because this was new to me, and I hadn't gone that long without seeing my kids in quite some time. And I drove to my apartment to show them, and I had fresh carpet. It was new, you know, we'd never had carpet before. And the kids ran around and were loving it, but I knew I had to hurry up and leave to get them back on time so I didn't get in trouble. So we stopped to get ice cream on the way back, and it was really difficult. And, you know, I was sitting there at Brahms with my kids, and every 3 or 4 minutes or so I'd have to get up and go to the bathroom because I was having dry heaves, I had hives, I was trying not to let them see me cry, and I wanted to make sure that we had a positive time getting ice cream. And so I took them back and returned them, and on my way back to my apartment I realized I didn't think I could go back, you know. And so I stopped, and I went to, I think, Target, wandered around there until they closed so that I could go back to my apartment. Then when I went back to my apartment, the first thing I noticed when I walked in is the bedroom door was open. Now I had a bedroom in this apartment that was designed for the 3 children to stay in there, and they had their own bathroom. And I noticed the door was open. Prior to me seeing the kids for that evening, that sign, that door open, that bedroom was a sign of hope that I was going to see my kids soon. But now when I see that door open, it was a sign that I'm not seeing them at all. And I might go another 20 days without seeing them. And it made me sad. And so I went and I shut that door. Now my daughter's oldest is 18 years old, and to this day, when they leave my house, I can't have those doors open. And so that particular night, I had tracked some mud on the carpet, so I got the vacuum cleaner out. And I started vacuuming and cleaning and stuff. And as I'm vacuuming, I look down and I see a footprint in the carpet. And I run the vacuum cleaner over that footprint. And I'm not paying attention. And I yank the vacuum cleaner back and I yell, oh my God, please, you know, let that footprint still be there. And it wasn't. And that's when I realized that there are a number of different types of attacks in the mental health world that your body can have. I had all of them. And as I fell to the ground, I hit my head. I wasn't happy about that. And it took me about an hour to regain my composure. And then once I stood up, I thought to myself, I have guns in the house. Now, I don't know why I thought that. I mean, I don't know why I thought that, but I had that thought in my head. I have weapons in my house, locked up and, you know, put away safely. And then I thought to myself, as a responsible gun owner, since I had that thought, I need to get them out of the house. And then I asked myself, I wondered if I was suicidal. And I thought to myself, I'm not suicidal, I don't feel like I'm suicidal, but I feel like in a moment I may be. So I need to get these guns out of the house. And then I asked myself, is it really a good idea to go in, open up my safe, and have loaded guns in my hand right now at 2 o'clock in the morning over a nervous breakdown and a panic attack, 2 of which I've never had before in my life? The answer was no. So what I did was I grabbed the safes, didn't open them, put them in my car at 2 in the morning, and took them to a trusted friend's house. And that was my experience the first time I got to see my children post-divorce. That was what my experience was like. Subsequently, I had experiences similar to that. We know the effects that divorce has on non-custodial parents. We know the effects that divorce has on men. Does a man really have to worry about dying while trying to be a good and present father post-divorce? Yes. Depression, anger, difficult adult attachments, financial decline, oftentimes supporting 2 households, unhealthy relationships, a rise in addiction. In the family court system, you're treated like a criminal. I've been on probation, even after being falsely accused, and you know, it goes on and on and on. And one of the things that I learned when I entered in the world of working with folks in post-divorce is that, in my experience, and in some of the literature that I've read, if you ask a mother what's the worst thing that she could imagine happening in her life, 100% of the time she's going to say the death of a child. If you ask a father that same question, almost 100% of the time they're going to say divorce, because of what it means for that particular father. The way that we tend to operate, we can think through the death of a child, as horrific as that sounds, but we can't think through the loss of going from a full-blown hands-on dad to, like that, going 20 days, 11 to 20 days without seeing your child. It's not something that's easy for us to process. You know, according to 2017 statistics, 129 men kill themselves, or 129 suicides occur each day. 70% of those suicides are men. And of that 70%, 100% are what the CDC calls unmarried. They won't use the word divorced. They'll use the word unmarried. And if you can ferret the statistics down further. So it's in my opinion, it's epidemic. Now sure, we have an antiquated adversarial family court system, you know, as more qualified people have spoken to already. That is true. And in a lot of ways, our culture has moved faster than the family court system's ability to adapt. There's still a stigma around men's health issues, and we have something to do with that as well. And we're not blameless either. You know, there's a lot of work that we have to do. But the more men that we have in this fight that are advocating for themselves, the more we're seeing that there's resistance coming from unreasonable places, and it's difficult to understand why in a lot of ways. The reality of divorce for men, 70% of divorces are initiated by women. 81.7% of women are awarded custody of the children. Fathers with standard visitation rights pay 79.1% of all child support, and 50% or greater of fathers without any visitation rights still financially support the children. Now, I do agree with the first speaker. I do think that the child support issue in terms of custody and visitation is a distraction. I do agree with that. I think that they're separate issues, and they're complicated and nuanced. And it's a losing battle for fathers to go in and try to fight both of those fights. I always tell the men that I work with, or the non-custodial parents that I work with, that you have to advocate for your right to see your child, and that can be your primary focus. It has to be your primary focus. It's going to be very difficult to make a valid argument in this court system otherwise. Is there a good child-centric reason for a child to not have equal time with both parents? Well, 63% of youth suicides are from fatherless homes. 90% of all homeless and runaway children are from fatherless homes. 85% of children who show behavior disorders come from fatherless homes. That's 20 times the average. And of course, those numbers go on. And that's from the Department of Health, the CDC. So my opinion on why we need change is if you take a look at those numbers and say, wouldn't it be a good dent in the system if we could turn some of those numbers around? I think the answer is yes. And like I said, we need to desperately rethink our antiquated, adversarial, and completely out-of-date family court system in a way that puts children first and frees up both parents to pursue healthy relationships and to create a life where they can model for their children how to behave in adulthood so they don't have to go through the same processes that we went through. There has to be value assigned to the struggle, or else it's just going to be detrimental. Now, I know that we have a time issue, but I want to end, so this will just take a minute, and I want to end sort of on this. One of the reasons why I chose to highlight the impact and the effects of suicide in this population is because I'm seeing a lot of it in my particular work, even just in Tarrant County. And these are circumstances that go unreported. About 2 months ago, I got a phone call, and it was midnight. My clients and the people that I work with have access to me. I do a lot of home visits. I work with folks with cerebral palsy, and I do a lot of on-scene stuff for traumatic events, etc. So my clients and those I work with have 24-hour access to me, and I'm frequently, half my week is spent out of my office working. And I got a phone call, and there's only 2 types of phone calls that I get after midnight, and I was afraid of what this one was. And the woman on the other end of the phone said, "I need you here in the morning, it's happened again." And that was the extent of the phone call. And so I hung up the phone, set my alarm for 6 o'clock, woke up, cleared my entire schedule, and headed out. And I'll just sort of describe the scene to you. But a man had pulled up to a gun range up in Texas, and it was in the middle of the afternoon. And he pulled into the gun range. His car was freshly washed, and the parking lot was empty. And he drove around and looked for a particular parking space and found one, and he backed his vehicle into that space. It was on the front end was on an incline at that point. Made sure the wheels were straight. had a stack of documents on the passenger side car all full of Post-its and arrows and notes and all sorts of things. He had opened up the glove box and pulled out the insurance information for the car, AAA, etc. He got out of the car, put his car keys on the car seat, rolled the window down about this much so an arm could get through just in case the car locked on its own. This was a new car and he hadn't quite got used to it yet. And he walked into the gun range and he went up to the young lady who was working the retail section. She was armed. And he asked if anybody was there shooting, if he was the only person who was patronizing the place at that time, and they told him yes. And he made a joke about how he seldom gets time off. And he asked what would be a good gun for home defense. He'd never handled a firearm before in his life. And so the young lady went through and kind of gave him a little class on what would be a good gun for home defense, and he selected that gun, and he said, "I've never fired a firearm before, could you help me out?" He said, "Of course." So she taught him how to use it, taught him how to load it, etc. Gave him his eye and ear protection and pointed him in the direction of the lane that he could go into. And as he walked away, she reminded him that he had forgot ammunition. And she asked him what he would like, and he said, "The smallest box available." And so she handed that to him. He went out on the range. At the time, another person was working, a fellow, I think he was about maybe 28 or 29. He was a war veteran, and this was the second gun range he'd worked at. And he was not armed that particular day, but he was the range master at the time. And so, I don't know how many people in here have heard gunshots before, but they sound different. And so a gunshot went off at the range, which is normally not uncommon, but something about it sounded different. And the young lady at the retail looked up at the monitor and saw the man slumped over in his lane, crawling around on all fours. And she immediately knew that there had been either an accidental discharge or some sort of an issue because the man was moving around. And so she started heading towards the range and realized that the man was on all fours searching for the gun that he had dropped after his failed attempt. Now, while the man failed the attempt to kill himself, he did succeed in shooting himself quite violently and horrifically. So to say that he was on all fours trying to find this gun without any sense of sight, hearing, taste, smell, you get the idea. Crawling around desperately trying to find this gun because the only thing that he could think of is if he fails, he will double or triple the burden on his family. The problem now for the young lady is we now have a person who's out of control trying to find a firearm that's loaded and is either going to intentionally harm himself or unintentionally hurt the staff. And she was trying to make a decision about what she was going to do when she encountered this person, whether she was going to draw her firearm or not. Now, the other man at the range was totally frozen. He was having some sort of a panic or anxiety attack or something. He wasn't armed. He wasn't quite sure what to do. And as the young lady got up to the window, she heard another round go off. And this gentleman succeeded in ending his life at the gun range. This gentleman was middle-aged, recently divorced, was losing custody of his children, and was having difficulty paying the child support that he was paying, and having difficulty in working that plan. I bring this up because it wasn't 3 weeks prior to that this happened at another gun range, and 2 months prior to that at another one. And so part of what I'm working on up in Fort Worth is I'm working on ways to identify these things. They behave the same way every single time. The same behaviors are the same. All of that stuff is on camera. All of that stuff is on video. And it's horrific. And I don't think that it should be that way. And so part of what I felt my job was to do today was to bring attention to how extreme that this problem is. And all the ideas and all the stuff that's been presented today is all incredibly valuable, and it's all accurate, and there is common sense. There's a common sense way to solve this problem. I just don't know that we're there yet, and we need to be. One of the things I would suggest that you do, if you like, is when you leave here today to Google the name Chris Mackney. It's Chris Mackney, M-A-C-K-N-E-Y. And take some time and read his suicide note. It gives a lot of information, and in the end, it's more powerful than anything I could have put together and articulated well here today. We desperately need to rethink our antiquated, adversarial, and completely outdated family court system. And we need to do it in a way that puts children first, especially children who are in the middle, but in a way that also doesn't pit parent against parent, so that they can preserve their ability to be functioning and healthy adults and enter into healthy relationships and demonstrate that for children. When I work in a clinical setting and I do groups at behavioral health hospitals, one thing I can tell you is that when you look at all of the kids or the adult children of divorce who are completely mired in the risk factors that we're afraid of as parents, they all have one thing in common. They didn't see even one healthy adult relationship in their childhood life. Subsequently, if you look at relatively adjusted adult children who are functioning and healthy, they all had one thing in common. They saw at least one healthy adult relationship in their life that would give them the ability to model that stuff. We need to have a system that doesn't pit parent against parent for a combat battle over the thing that's most vulnerable to both of them. We can't have a system that supports that. And I think that the presumption of equal and shared access to children as an immediate assumption is the way to go. And currently we can do that. We have a system in place currently that has coverage for parents who aren't fit, who aren't able, or where abuse is involved, etc. And so I want to thank you very much for allowing me to speak and give my anecdotes about what it's like practicing up in Tarrant County.